JJ, I wanted to ask you about the final episodes of Felicity, because it ended and it was great, and then you had this brilliant final few episodes and then when you tried to explain it to someone who was a fan, like, oh wait, she goes back in time, and they look at you like you're nuts, but it was so amazing. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Matt should actually talk about that, because the truth is, I was sort of deeply embroiled in the first season of Alias during that. I was there, we were all in the same office. It was actually an incredible year because both shows were happening in the same place, and so you'd look out and Ben would be playing basketball with Weiss, and I'd be like, is he Sean or Weiss? Because it's the same guy. But the thing is that when we do those last episodes, we thought we were going to be canceled 17 episodes in.
Well, what happened was at the beginning of the season, actually, it was a very strange meeting we had. We sat down for our first sort of meeting to talk about what we were going to do. We knew it was the year she was graduating. I wasn't sure exactly what would happen after that, although we'd always talked about the idea of what her life might be after that. And the network came in, and this was before any shows had aired. We were coming up with the stories for the season, and in essence, the network person said, now, this is the last season of the show. And we were like, oh. And so we're like, okay, well, that makes things very clear. And they had another show that the previous season, we'd done this thing where we aired, and then they put in another, I think the show was called Jack and Jill, and that aired for part of the season, and then we came back, and they were going to do that again with us. And what happened was, partway through, as we were doing all of our shows, they called us up and they said, okay, and we just knew we were going to build to Felicity's graduation, that was what was really important to us. And they said, okay, so you're going to have 17 or you're going to have 22. And we said, okay. You want to let us know whether we're going to have 17 or 22? And they said 17 or 22. And so we said, okay, well, why don't we shoot for 22, because that sounds good to us. So we kept working on the stories, and then at a certain point they called us up and said, we think it's going to be 17. And we were like, okay, so it's going to be 17. And we thought, well, what would be terrible to the fans would be if the show ended and Felicity didn't graduate. That would be like, oh, I went to college, and then the show just stopped. So it just seemed like, well, we can't possibly do that. So we called up the network executive, and this guy, he said to me, I assure you, 17 is the number. Well, they put on this show. Don't know what it was, actually. It was some kind of weird show. I don't know. Didn't do well. And so they said, oh, okay, well, we're going to need more shows. But we'd already done, and actually Scott Foley directed the final episode of this series, which was a great episode about the graduation. It was really emotional. And we were all like so happy with it. And then as that's going on, they said, yeah, and now we need 5 more. And we said, well, that's great, because she's graduated. And they said, well, maybe what would be great is if you had summer school. We said, she's graduated. It was like the worst idea for a story I'd ever heard. I was like, the thing is about how she graduated. And maybe she will take some Spanish. Like, I don't know. Basically, the idea was, well, we pursued the story this way. Instead of doing summer school in Spanish, what if we saw what would happen if she made a different choice? And we thought, what an interesting sort of way to go. And so we just had fun with it. We had no idea. And Jennifer Levin did just an incredible job. She did so much of the writing last year. She basically ran the writer's room in the show. And she did beautiful, beautiful scripts. And that last section was so... Felicity had gone through a lot of very difficult stuff that year. And all of a sudden, there was, by virtue of the fact that Felicity knew what had happened, because apparently she'd seen the series too, she had this new burst of life. And so Carrie embraced it so well. And that's really... We just had this... It was really just a quirk. It was like we thought the series was going to end in one place, but it ended later, and it just ended up being this sort of fun gift where it was like, okay, well, we'll go back, and for people who followed the show, they'll know that this is, and they'll be just where Carrie is, which is she'll just enter this world and say, okay, well, I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to do this. And they thought, well, what'll be fun is once she thinks that she has the whole thing, that at a certain point there are going to be emotional consequences, and it won't be as easy to just say, well, you know what, go to hell, Ben. And be like, oh, well, I guess I still kind of like Ben. And so we wanted to find a way so that the story would still end in the same place.